There are moments in life when everything feels quiet, too quiet. It's in that stillness, when the noise of the world fades away, that something ancient begins to whisper, but not everyone hears it. And those who do, they often don't understand what it is. At first, it feels like a thought that isn't yours, a message that arrives out of nowhere, like a soft wind blowing through your chest. That's how the story of Elias begins. Elias wasn't special, not in the way people usually mean it. He didn't meditate for hours. He didn't have crystals on his shelf. And he didn't call himself spiritual. He was just lost, tired of a world that felt fake. He had questions, but no one around him wanted to talk about the answers. So he kept quiet, pretending he was fine. But deep inside, a part of him was calling out for truth, for meaning, for something real. One night, something strange happened. He had a dream so vivid it didn't feel like a dream at all. In it, he was standing in a desert. The sand was golden, the sky was purple, and the air was still. In the distance, he saw a figure dressed in white and gold, holding a long staff. The figure didn't speak. Instead, Elias heard a voice not outside of him, but inside. It said, "When the mind is ready, the gates shall appear." Elias woke up in sweat. The words echoed in his chest for days. He didn't know why, but he felt something had changed. That morning, while walking to work, he passed a bookstore he had never noticed before. Inside, on the front table, there was only one book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean. Something about it pulled him in. He bought it without thinking. That night, he read the first few lines, and his heart began to race. "Seek ye, and ye shall find the pathway to the stars. Only the awakened may know the way." The words hit something deep in him. He didn't know who Thoth was, but the name felt familiar, as if he'd heard it long ago, maybe in another life. He began researching. Egyptian gods, Atlantean myths, secret teachings. The more he read, the more a picture began to form. Thoth wasn't just a scribe or a god of knowledge. He was something older, something cosmic, a guide between worlds, a keeper of truth hidden in plain sight. Elias began to dream more often. In one dream, he stood before a giant black stone pyramid under a night sky full of stars. In another, he saw symbols floating in the air, ones he couldn't understand but somehow felt. The voice returned, always saying the same thing: "The gate is near, but only when you are ready." He started noticing signs in the waking world too. The number 7 showed up again and again. He would look at the clock at 7:07. He would see license plates ending in 777. At work, someone mentioned a documentary on ancient Egypt out of nowhere. At a coffee shop, someone left behind a journal with a drawing of the Eye of Horus. None of it felt random. It was as if something was nudging him forward. And still, that sentence haunted him. Only when you are ready. One day, he couldn't take it anymore. He packed a bag, booked a one-way flight to Cairo, and left. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't know what he was doing. But something inside him knew. He needed to find the source. Not just of the dreams, but of the message itself. When he landed, everything felt surreal. The air was dry, the sun too bright. He felt like he had stepped into another world, one that had been waiting for him. He traveled to Luxor, then to the Temple of Thoth in Hermopolis. The ruins stood silent, almost forgotten, but Elias felt watched. Not in a threatening way, but as if the stones themselves were aware of him. There, standing among broken pillars and fallen statues, Elias closed his eyes. The wind stopped. The world grew still. And in that silence, the voice came again, clearer than ever before. This is not about gods. This is not about history. This is about remembrance. You are not learning something new. You are remembering something ancient. Elias fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't know why he was crying. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper. Something like the return of a lost piece of himself. For the first time, he understood. Thoth's message wasn't in words. It was a feeling, a frequency, a quiet knowing that arrives only when the soul is open, quiet, and ready. Back at his hotel, he tried to explain what had happened. He wrote it all down. But the more he tried to put into words, the more it slipped away. Language was too small for it. He realized then, this message, it cannot be forced onto anyone. It is not a teaching to give, but a signal to receive, and only those who are tuned in will ever hear it. And so began Elias' journey, not to find Thoth, but to remember what he already knew. And now, dear listener, if you've come this far, ask yourself something, not with your mind, but with your heart. Why are you listening to this? Because maybe, just maybe, you're ready too. The desert sun was heavy the next morning, but Elias woke early, his body full of energy, as if something ancient had lit a fire inside him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was guiding him now, not just in dreams, but in every step. It was like being pulled by a silent thread through time. The ruins of Hermopolis still called to him. He returned, walking past fallen columns and sunburned stones, until he found himself in front of what looked like a half-buried doorway. He hadn't noticed it before. It was shaped like a perfect arch, cut into the rock, but it led nowhere, just a wall behind it. Still, something about it felt alive. Elias placed his hand on the stone. Everything went black. He wasn't in the ruins anymore. He wasn't even in Egypt. He stood in a room without walls, without a sky, just darkness and silence. He couldn't feel the ground. He couldn't feel his own body, but he wasn't afraid. A golden light began to glow in the distance, and from it, a voice emerged. Not Thoth's, not the one from his dreams. This one felt deeper, older, like the voice of time itself. You seek the truth, it said, but you must first pass through the inner gate. Before Elias could ask what that meant, 3 shapes appeared before him. They were not human, but they weren't monsters either. Each one shimmered with a strange light and seemed to look into his soul. This is the first trial, said the voice. The trial of fear. The first figure stepped forward. Its form was blurry like smoke, but Elias could see flashes, memories, maybe he saw his childhood fears. The dark, being left alone. The moment he learned someone he loved had died. Every heartbeat from the past that once made him afraid came rushing back. The figure grew taller, darker, more terrifying. Elias wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The fear pressed on him like weight. He couldn't breathe. He dropped to his knees and tried to scream, but nothing came out. And then he remembered. He remembered the silence and the ruins. He remembered the voice that said, "You are remembering, not learning." He closed his eyes and faced the figure, not with strength, but with surrender. "I see you," he whispered, "and I am not running anymore." The figure stopped. It let out a long breath and faded into the light. "This is the second trial," said the voice. The trial of doubt. The second figure took shape. This one looked more like a reflection, a version of Elias himself, but with cold eyes and a mocking smile. "You think you're chosen?" it said. "You think a broken man like you deserves ancient knowledge? You've failed. You've lied. You've doubted yourself your whole life. Who are you to carry the message of Thoth?" Every word hit like a stone. Doubt had followed Elias like a shadow for years. The thought that he was not enough had whispered in his ear for so long. He believed it. And yet, something inside pushed back, a whisper beneath the doubt. He stepped toward the figure. "I don't have to be perfect," he said. "I just have to be open." The figure flinched. "I'm not here because I'm better than anyone. I'm here because I listened." The reflection cracked and crumbled, falling into dust. "This is a third trial," the voice said, "the trial of self." The final figure emerged, quiet, still, and strangely familiar. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But Elias knew what it was. It was his ego, the version of himself he had built over the years to survive, the one who wanted to be important, to be seen, to be right, to be praised for finding the truth. This trial was not loud. It was not scary. It was subtle. It made Elias feel proud of himself for having come this far. It whispered, "You are the chosen one. You will change the world. You will become great." And that was the danger. He stared at the figure and felt a strange sadness. "You helped me survive," he said quietly. "You helped me feel strong when I was weak. But I don't need you anymore. This message isn't mine to own. It isn't for my glory. I am just a vessel. The ego didn't fight back. It smiled softly. Then it dissolved like mist in morning sun. Suddenly, the golden light from before grew brighter. The darkness around Elias melted away. He stood once again in front of the stone archway in the ruins of Hermopolis. But something had changed. The wall behind the arch was gone. In its place was a narrow hallway, glowing with a soft blue light, leading deep underground. He didn't hesitate. Step by step, Elias entered the passage, each footfall echoing with the weight of 1,000 years. The air was cool. The walls were carved with symbols he couldn't read. But again, he could feel them. They weren't just writing. They were vibrations, frequencies of truth. And deep down, he knew he had passed through the inner gate, not just in this place, but within himself. The trials weren't meant to test his knowledge. They were meant to purify him, to make him ready, not because Thoth needed strong followers, but because the message itself could only exist inside a vessel made clear. And so, as Elias descended further, the air grew thicker, the symbols brighter. And then, finally, the passage opened into a wide, circular chamber. In the center, a golden pedestal. On the pedestal, a single object, a book. But not just any book. This one had no title, no words on the cover. It shimmered with a soft light, as if it was alive. Elias stepped forward, his breath calm, his heart steady. The voice returned one final time. You have entered the temple. But the temple is not this place. It is you. The book contains a message. But the message is not written. It is remembered. Elias reached out and placed his hand on the cover. Everything around him faded into white, and the real journey began. The moment Elias touched the book, the world dissolved. There were no walls, no temple, no sound, only white light, soft and endless like a morning fog. He couldn't feel his body anymore, but he wasn't afraid. Something in him whispered, "This is exactly where you are meant to be." Then, slowly, the light began to move, not like a light bulb flickering, but like waves in an ocean. The space around him breathed, as if it were alive. Shapes began to form. Symbols, not letters, not words, but feelings turned into form. The kind of thing you don't read, you just know. And that's when Elias realized something. The book hadn't opened. He had. The message of Thoth was not written on paper. It lived in a place beyond language, a place beyond thought. It was alive, and now it was moving through him. He didn't see pages. He saw memories, but not his. The first vision came gently, like wind through tall grass. He saw a planet, shining blue and green, turning slowly in the dark. Earth, but not as it is today. There were no cities, no roads, just forests, oceans, mountains, and then light, beings of light. They floated above the ground, glowing with peace. They didn't speak with words. They shared knowing. They were builders, guides, teachers. One of them stepped forward. Elias didn't need a name. He just knew this was Thoth. But he didn't look like a man. He was tall and radiant, with eyes that felt like eternity itself. He wasn't Egyptian. He wasn't human. He was truth in form. You were there, the voice echoed. You were always there. Elias saw flashes himself in another life, walking beside Thoth, not as a follower, but as a student, a learner, a rememberer. It was overwhelming. Tears formed, even in this place of no body, no time, not from sadness, but from remembering something his soul had buried long ago. The vision changed. He saw pyramids, built not as tombs, but as tools, machines of energy, places where spirit and matter met. He saw sound being used to move stone. He saw light as knowledge and geometry as language. Everything was vibration. Everything was alive. The teachings of Thoth were not about worship. They were about alignment. Then the images faded. Now Elias stood inside the book, not beside it, but within it. Each page was a layer of his soul. Each line was a part of his journey. And the message? It wasn't a command. It wasn't a rule. It was a mirror, one that showed him who he truly was. "You are not here to carry my words," said the voice again. "You are here to become the message Elias didn't understand. How can I become something I don't fully know? He asked without speaking. And Thoth replied gently, because knowing is not the path. Being is. More visions poured in. He saw humans chasing answers, building temples, writing books, praying to gods, but missing the truth that was always inside them. He saw people looking up to the sky for help, while ignoring the voice that whispered within. And he saw pain, war, confusion, loneliness, not as evil, but as forgetfulness, a forgetting of what we really are. Then he saw something that made his soul tremble, a future, a time where many would feel lost, where technology would fill every moment, where silence would become rare, and people would fear stillness, a time when the message of Thoth would almost disappear. Almost, because hidden in the chaos, a few would begin to feel the call, not through temples, not through rituals, but through emptiness. They would feel tired of the noise, tired of the lies, tired of pretending, and in that tiredness, they would hear the voice, soft but real, like Elias had. "You are one of them," said Thoth. "You are a bridge. You do not need to speak to millions. You only need to speak to those who are ready. And when you do, the message will carry itself." Elias began to understand. This book wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to activate. It didn't care about your religion, your beliefs, or your past. It only responded to one thing: readiness. That's why most people would never hear it. Not because they were bad or unworthy, but because they were still asleep. And the message doesn't shout. It waits, patient, silent, like a seed under the ground, waiting for the right season. Elias saw himself now, not in the past, not in the future, but as he truly was, a soul wrapped in a human body, walking a forgotten path back to truth. And he saw others too, faces he didn't recognize but felt connected to, people across the world, waking up one by one, like lights turning on in the dark. Then, as gently as it had started, the vision faded. He stood once more in the stone chamber beneath the earth, hand still on the book. But the room felt different. It wasn't just a chamber anymore. It was a doorway, and something had changed in him. He didn't feel small. He didn't feel afraid. He felt clear, not because he had gained some special power, but because he had remembered something most people had forgotten, that the universe is not something outside of us. It is within. And Thoth's message was never about answers. It was about awakening. He turned from the book, not to leave it behind, but because it was now inside him. As he walked back up the tunnel, the walls no longer felt like stone. They felt like echoes, echoes of something sacred. And even though he didn't speak, even though he didn't carry the book with him, he knew the message would follow him because it had become part of him. Outside, the desert sun was setting, painting the sky with fire and gold. And for the first time in his life, Elias didn't feel lost. He felt found. But deep in his heart, he knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of the real test. Because now that he carried the message, he would face a world that had forgotten how to listen. Elias sat on a stone near the edge of the ruins. The desert stretched out before him, endless and golden, the sky bleeding into twilight. The silence around him was deep, but inside his mind stirred like a rising tide. He had touched something ancient, something beyond logic or belief. But as the stars began to light the sky, he felt a question rise within him. What now? He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel enlightened. He just felt open, like a window had been cleaned for the first time in centuries. But that opening also came with weight, a sense that something even deeper was about to unfold. That night, Elias found a small inn to rest in. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unsure if he was falling asleep or waking up. Then, without warning, his body grew heavy. Not tired, heavy, like gravity itself had tripled. His breath slowed, his vision blurred, and then everything stopped. No sound, no heartbeat, no time. He opened his eyes, but the room was gone. He was floating in a vast space, not black, not white, just space. Still, endless, soft like a breath held in the chest of the universe. Stars hovered around him like frozen sparks. Planets in the distance. Spirals of galaxies. It wasn't a dream. It was more real than anything he had ever felt. And then, without sound or warning, he was there. Thoth, not in form, not as a being standing before him, but as presence, a field of knowing, a voice made of silence. It didn't speak with words, but the meaning came clear. "You have touched the surface of the message," it said. "Now you must see what lies beneath." The stars around Elias began to move. They flowed past him like rivers, as if time itself had become liquid. He saw scenes, not of Earth, but of other worlds. Civilizations long forgotten. Great cities made of crystal and light. Beings of every shape, glowing with wisdom, working in harmony with the fabric of creation. He saw what Earth used to be, a center of learning, a meeting point of cosmic teachers, a sacred school where souls came to remember who they were. And then he saw the fall, the forgetting, the great silence. Thoth's presence moved closer. Long ago, Earth was aligned with the higher realms, the voice said, but humanity chose separation, not out of evil, but out of fear, the fear of its own power. So the memory of who you truly are was buried. Elias saw it. The fall wasn't one moment. It was a slow turning away. From the stars, from truth, from silence. People began to listen to fear instead of light. And so, the temples were covered in sand. The books were hidden. The voices of stars faded. But the message was not lost, said Thoth, only delayed. Time spun faster now. Elias saw the present. Cities filled with people, yet so many walking like ghosts. Screens in every hand, noise in every ear, endless movement. And beneath it all, a deep hunger, not for food or money, but for something real, something remembered. And in the middle of that world, people like Elias, people waking up, quietly, gently, as if pulled by a thread from the other side of time. You were never meant to wake the world, Thoth whispered. You were meant to be awake in it. Elias felt tears again, not from sadness, but from the sheer beauty of the truth. There was no need to fight, no need to convince anyone. The message of Thoth wasn't a mission. It was a vibration, a frequency that would touch only those who were ready to feel it. Then Thoth showed him something that shook him to the core. The future. Not a future set in stone, but a fork. Two paths. One path was dark, a world addicted to speed, a world where people replaced wisdom with data, where the body was forgotten and the soul was denied, a world where truth was labeled dangerous and silence became a threat. But the other path, it was light, not because everything was easy, but because people began to return to the self, return to nature, return to stillness. It began with a few, those who listened, those who remembered, those who carried the message without speaking it. And from them, the vibration spread, not as noise, but as being. And the more Elias watched, the more he understood. The message of Thoth was not about changing the world. It was about changing how you live in it. Elias saw himself years from now, not as a prophet or leader, but as a man walking calmly through chaos. People would ask him, "How do you stay at peace?" And he wouldn't answer with words. He would simply be, and that would be enough. Then Thoth said something he would never forget. The message is not for the mind. It is for the soul. That is why most will not hear it. But those who do will never be the same. The stars around him slowed. Time itself seemed to bow in silence. The space began to dissolve again, like mist in morning light. Elias felt his breath return, his heartbeat, the weight of his body. The room of the inn came back into focus. The ceiling, the walls, the quiet. He sat up slowly, sweating, shaking, but not afraid. He knew what he had seen was real. But how could he explain it? He couldn't, and maybe he wasn't supposed to, because this message wasn't a story. It wasn't information. It was remembrance. And the only way to pass it on was to live it. The next morning, he rose before the sun. He walked out into the desert one last time. The sky was turning from black to deep blue, the stars fading. He stood still, letting the cool wind touch his skin, his heart open. And in the silence, he whispered back to the stars, "I remember." And in that whisper, the vibration carried, not to the world, but to those who were already listening. Days passed, but time no longer moved the same for Elias. The streets of Egypt were still crowded, the air still dusty, the voices of sellers still loud in the marketplace. But to him, everything felt distant. It was as if he had one foot in this world and one in another. People passed by him like shadows, unaware of the light he now carried inside. It wasn't pride. It wasn't power. It was quiet, gentle, but strong enough to shake the walls of his old life. And yet, something inside him still waited, like a door had opened, but he was standing at the edge, unsure if he was meant to walk through. One evening, Elias wandered back to the ruins, not out of curiosity, but because his soul led him there. The sun was low, and the temple stones cast long shadows across the sand. He sat down near the old archway, the one that had led him into the underground chamber. It looked the same, but he had changed. He closed his eyes, and the moment he did, the world around him vanished. Again, he found himself in the white stillness. But this time, Thoth did not speak right away. There were no visions, no galaxies, just a silence. Then, after what felt like forever, the voice returned, not booming, not distant, but close. Inside, "You have seen the message," it said. "You have remembered who you are. Now you must choose." Elias breathed slowly. Choose what? To carry the message is to leave behind the path of comfort. It is not a gift to possess. It is a fire to walk through. Visions began to form, this time of Elias' own life. He saw himself back in the city, among friends, family, the normal flow of daily life. He saw how easy it would be to return, to forget everything, to call it a dream, to file it away as a strange moment of inspiration, and go on pretending. And then he saw the other path, one of solitude, one of quiet steps, a life with a message inside him would grow like a tree, slowly, steadily, but also one that would often feel lonely, because he couldn't explain it. He couldn't prove it. He could only live it. "This path will not bring you fame," said Thoth. "It will not bring applause, but it will bring peace, the kind no one can take from you." Elias fell silent. He wasn't afraid, but the choice was real and final. He could return to his old self, forget the visions, forget the vibration, and live a normal life. Or he could carry the message quietly, invisibly, and become a living vessel of truth in a world that had forgotten how to see it. He thought of the book, the living book that had shown him not facts, but feelings, not rules, but remembrance. And he realized the message wasn't something he had found. It was something he had always carried, but only now could feel. And that meant others carried it too, even if they didn't know it yet. He opened his eyes and looked around. The temple was still, the sky now full of stars. He whispered to wind, "I choose the message." And something shifted, not outside, not around him. Within, the quiet in his chest turned into warmth, the warmth into light. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flashes, no lightning, just truth. He understood now. The message wasn't to be shouted. It was to be lived, in how he walked, in how he listened, in how he remained still while the world rushed by. As he rose to his feet, Thoth's voice returned one final time, not with more visions, but with soft truth that planted itself like a seed in his heart. Those who carry the message will never be many, but they will always find each other, not through words, not through names, but through the silence behind their eyes. When two who carry the message meet, they will know. And with that, the presence faded. Elias felt the ground beneath his feet. He looked up at the night sky, at the stars watching him from above, and for the first time he felt them not as distant lights, but as family. In the days that followed, Elias returned to the world. He spoke when needed, but less than before. He smiled more. He moved slower. People around him noticed, but didn't understand. Some asked if he was okay. Some grew uncomfortable with his silence. Others began to feel drawn to him, without knowing why. One woman, a stranger at a cafe, looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "Do I know you from somewhere?" Elias smiled. "Maybe not in this life," he said gently. And she nodded, as if something in her heart stirred. This was the beginning of the path. not to convert, not to teach, but to be, to carry the message in his energy, in his stillness, in his presence, to become the reminder for others, just as the voice had once been a reminder for him. And he knew this was how it had always worked. The message of Thoth was not passed down in books, but in beingness. It moved like water, silent and steady, only entering the vessels that were open, humble, and ready. It was a path without applause, a journey without finish, a fire that lit only those who were willing to be burned clean. And Elias had chosen it. Fully, completely, quietly. Months passed. Elias no longer chased answers. He no longer searched temples or followed signs, not because he had stopped seeking, but because something inside him had settled. The message wasn't a puzzle to solve anymore. It had become the ground beneath his feet, the air in his lungs, the silence between his thoughts. He had returned to his home, a small town far from the ruins of Egypt. But nothing felt the same, not because the world had changed, but because he had. He walked slower. He listened more. He didn't explain what had happened. He didn't try to convince anyone. He simply lived the truth he had touched. And little by little, the world around him began to shift, not in loud ways, but in the quiet that only the soul can feel. It began with small things. At the market, an older man who always looked angry suddenly paused one day, stared at Elias, and said, "You remind me of someone I knew long ago, someone peaceful." Elias only smiled and nodded. At a bookstore, a child pointed at a strange symbol on a dusty old cover, the same kind Elias had seen beneath the temple, and asked her mother, "What's this?" "It feels like I've seen it before." The mother shrugged. Elias gently ran his hand over the book's spine, silently passing on the vibration. Then one night, something strange happened. Elias was walking home under the stars when he noticed someone sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, head down, shoulders heavy. A young man, maybe in his 20s. Elias sat beside him without a word. After a long silence, the man said, "I don't know what's wrong with me. I feel like I don't belong here, like the world is loud and fake, and I'm waiting for something real to show up." Elias didn't say much, just placed a hand gently on the man's shoulder and looked him in the eyes. That was enough. The man's eyes widened, like he had just remembered something important. He didn't know what it was, but the silence between them carried a weight, a warmth, a truth that didn't need words. And Elias knew this is how the message spreads, not through teaching, not through preaching, but through energy, through presence. People who were ready would begin to feel it, a restlessness, a pull, a soft longing for something they couldn't name. Some would feel it through pain, others through wonder, some through dreams, like Elias had, some through loss. But always, only when they were ready. And when they were, the message would find them, not in temples, not in books, but through other souls who carried it, like a quiet string stretched across lifetimes, connecting the few who had chosen the path of remembrance. Elias understood now. Thoth's message was not a call to worship. It was a mirror, one that reflected your truest self, but only when you stopped running, stopped shouting, and sat still long enough to feel. And those who did, they became lights. Quiet lights, not the kind that flash or blind, but the kind that guide you home in the dark. Over time, Elias began to meet others. A woman who'd been painting strange symbols for years, not knowing why. A man who heard music in his dreams and woke up with melodies no one had ever written. A child who spoke of stars like they were family. None of them claimed to be special. None of them called themselves awakened. But they recognized each other, not with names, but with silence. It was a knowing that passed from soul to soul, a vibration that didn't need translation. It said, "You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are remembering." And in that remembering, they didn't become teachers. They became examples. They didn't give people instructions. They gave them permission to feel what they already knew inside. And that was the secret. The message of Thoth was never about building a following. It was never meant for crowds. It was meant for those who were ready to hold it. And the truth was, most would never be ready. Not in this life. Maybe not in the next. But some would. And that's why it mattered. because one awakened soul could remind 10, and those 10 could become still enough to touch the lives of others, not with lessons, not with magic, but with presence. It rippled, it echoed, and it spread, quietly like a whisper between worlds. Elias lived his days simply. He worked in a garden. He wrote in a journal. He watched the sky more than the news. Sometimes he would receive letters, strangers writing to say they had dreamed of an ancient temple or felt drawn to Egypt without reason. Some told him they had seen his face in visions. Others said nothing, just sent a drawing or a stone or a word they couldn't explain. He answered with kindness, but never tried to explain, because he knew the message would awaken inside them in its own way, in its own time. And when it did, they would understand just as he had. The truth cannot be taught. It can only be remembered. And the real work was not in finding more people. The real work was staying clear, staying empty enough that the message could keep living through him, not as an idea, but as a state of being. So he stayed quiet, he stayed grounded, and he stayed open, because he knew the message wasn't done with him yet. And maybe it's not done with you either. Because if you've listened this far, if something deep in your chest is stirred, if your skin has tingled or your eyes have watered, and you don't even know why, then maybe you're one of them, one of the rememberers, one of the ready ones. Not perfect, not chosen, but open. And maybe now the message is inside you. So don't rush, don't shout, just listen. Because sometimes the loudest truths are the ones spoken in silence. And Thoth's message was never meant to be heard by all, only by those who were finally ready to hear it.